Most founders think that their co founder relationship is just a business arrangement with shared vision, complementary skills, and aligned incentives. But what they don't expect to discover is that they are running the exact same relational patterns in the company that they've run in every significant relationship in their life. And when those patterns activate, they show up as dysfunction. And that dysfunction is slow to name, expensive to fix, and almost always blamed on the wrong cause. I'm Dr. Matthew Jones, and I help co-founding teams fix exactly that before costing the company. And today I want to talk about attachment theory, where it comes from, what it explains about co-founder relationships, and why knowing your attachment style is one of the most practical things you can do for your partnership. And by the end, you're going to know the exact three attachment styles, the three patterns that they generate in founding teams, and what to do when you spot your own. So, just to start, attachment theory comes from the psychologist John Bowlby, and he says that the drive to connect is not learned, it's innate. We're wired to seek secure attachment, especially under stress. And co founding, in a startup context, is one of the most activating experiences available to a human being, right? Like your identity fuses with the company's success, money and markets are never certain, and you're living all of it with somebody else going through something similar but different based on their own perspective. And under those stressful conditions, attachment patterns activate and they drive a lot of business misalignment. So, Dr. Sue Johnson is the creator of emotion focused couples therapy, which is built primarily on some of these deeper attachment pieces. And she distilled 6 things about attachment theory that I believe map directly onto your co founding partnership. Number one, attachment is innate. It's not a weakness. That drive to feel connected to your co founder is in your neurobiological wiring, right? It's not a character flaw. Two, attachment, when it's secure, creates autonomy. Like when you trust your co founder, and you think that they are reliable, available, and responsive, that makes you bolder. It helps you take more risks and become more independent, not less. Three, attachment buffers against those outside stressors. So when you have a grounded partnership that can help you feel secure in times of distress, that is a genuine competitive advantage. Four, fear and uncertainty increase those attachment related needs, right? So the more pressure that you're under and that the company's under, the more unconsciously you will be seeking reassurance from your co founder. And when the partnership can't meet that, the internal pressure increases relational friction, and that shows up in the business. Five, when those needs go unmet, a predictable sequence follows. Things like anger, clinging, withdrawal, detachment. And at every single stage, those cost you in slower decision making and power struggles. And sixth, and this is the one to really hold on to. Insecure attachment also follows a distinct recognizable pattern, and those patterns are fundamentally changeable. So, to see why those patterns are so recognizable, you have to go slightly further back, further back than Johnson, to where they actually come from, which is in 1978. A developmental psychologist named Mary Ainsworth identified 3 main attachment patterns in infants and their caregivers. And those early patterns were then mapped onto kind of a working model for every single close relationship after that, including your co founder. So the first is secure attachment. And this is in your context, you and your co founder can hit rupture and repair without it threatening the stability of the partnership, right? And so secure teams, when things are going well in this capacity, spend less energy managing the relationship and more energy focused on making decisions and executing. The second piece here, the second main attachment style is what we call anxious attachment. And this tends to show up when a partner is more highly critical. But typically, that criticism is actually an unconscious anxiety about closeness and emotional attunement and that kind of this whole attachment piece in disguise, right? So that criticism is actually an attempt to provoke contact and confirm the other person is invested to that same extent. The third pattern here is avoidant attachment, and this tends to show up more as shutdown, like that withdrawal, freezing, disengaging from conflict. And so I am curious, just to pause briefly, which of those 3 styles best described you? What about your partner? Because knowing your style is one layer, and that can be really valuable. And what matters even more is trying to understand, how do these patterns intersect? How do they meet? Because that intersection then generates one of 3 predictable patterns in founding teams. The first main pattern, and I see this all the time in my work, is one partner pursues and the other withdraws. This is known in EFT as a pursue withdraw dynamic. And so in this case, one founder escalates, shares more criticism, more negative pressure and feedback, and then the other starts to shut down and starts becoming less emotionally available. And so then that pursuer, the person who's doing that criticizing, reads the withdrawer as, oh, they don't care, they're disengaged, they can't handle it, they're not scaling. And so then the withdrawer reads this escalation as, hey, this isn't safe. And all this added pressure feels unfair and unjust, and my contribution's not being seen. And both of these readings are logical, and unfortunately, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where one pushes and then the other kind of pulls back, and that just continues. It becomes a dynamic, right? That's not just based on one person alone. It becomes the facet and the defining characteristic of the partnership. And so the fix here is pretty straightforward. The pursuer must soften and needs to actually work on identifying, one, ideally taking ownership of that unconscious anxiety, and two, asking for what they need instead of criticizing for it. Because underneath that criticism is almost always an unstated request, right? And the withdrawer starts to then build enough safety to share what's actually going on for them, which might include instead of just, one, taking ownership of their disengagement, but then also maybe getting into some of their resentment and some of their unspoken needs. Whereas if you leave this pattern alone, it just leads to one co-founder being labeled as the problem and the other playing the parent. And then the whole team watches it happen, and it's exceptionally painful. Pattern two, this is kind of a cold partnership. This is whenever both partners avoid conflict. And so this is a lot quieter, but that's actually what makes this dangerous, right? The partnership looks calm and it's actually stagnant. Like the conflict has been frozen in place because nobody starts the hard conversation. So misalignment and emotional debt compile and they compound and they stay unaddressed, and then that leads to more resentment. And then the culture, by the way, starts to mirror it. Like people suppress their real thoughts, don't give direct feedback, back channeling increases, and then those real risks that are kind of happening just go unnamed. And so then by the time actually this starts surfacing, in a all hands meeting or whatever the case may be, the cost is really high, and there's then a lot of work to catch up on. And honestly, this is probably one of the bigger risks that I see in most partnership blowing up, is whenever that emotional debt has compounded for so long and it's remained unaddressed, and then they come in to see me as everything's on fire. Don't do that. The fix, just to give you the snapshot here, is for safety to be built on both sides. In this case, you need more containment, more consistency of regular meetings. You need a little bit more, like sometimes having a little bit of frameworks here, it can be useful. Some of these tools to help you speak up and ask more questions about the other's experience can be quite beneficial. Pattern three, this is like a hot partnership where both partners are escalating. So this is that pursue. And this is the highest activation pattern. I do see this, but actually less frequently, which I do think is interesting. And in this type of pattern, both founders escalate into criticism, defensiveness, this volatility. And the whole organization then starts walking on eggshells, right? Because they're never sure which version of the leadership is going to show up. And so good people start leaving, and the ones who stay stop being honest. The fix here is, again, really straightforward. It's self-regulation. You need to slow down. You need to take breaks. And you need to start getting re-regulated before any conversation can be productive, right? Because, and this isn't just to say like feelings matter in the abstract, but it's really because this pattern is bleeding into the execution of the company. It's decreasing, distribution of information, of trust, and then it starts impacting the talent that you can't really afford to lose. And so if I were to think about all three of these within a single team, let me just give you kind of a case example here. So let's say that I worked with three co-founders, Tiffany, Steve, and Jerry. That's not their real names. And they were running a quite profitable service business. And, after a couple of years, some of these tensions really started to escalate and impact the rest of the team. Now, Steve and Jerry, they were the ones who had the sharpest degree of conflict. So when tension increased, Jerry shut down. He went quiet. And this, by the way, was a survival mechanism that he learned growing up in his household. Whereas Steve had the opposite learning in his household. He learned that if he didn't advocate loudly, he would just be overlooked. And then Tiffany, she just kind of defaulted to caretaking. So she was kind of in between both of these folks. And that was also a role that she was comfortable in and that she grew up with. And she also did some exec coaching on the side, right? So this was quite natural for her. But unfortunately, this also meant, disavowing her own needs and her own concerns about the company's direction. But as we were able to name and map this pattern consistently, where it was in a sense kind of a drama triangle of sorts, then we were able to create some shifts because even though the conflict didn't immediately disappear, those patterns became workable. It became something that the team could observe and then call out instead of just getting caught in. So then that energy that had been burning the dynamic actually went back into the business. And that's the shift this type of thinking and this type of framework create. Invisible patterns can't be changed, they can only compound. Whereas once you know your attachment style and you can catch your own defensive moves for what they really are, and you have more clarity about what the group dynamic is, and you can interpret then your co-founder in a different way. For example, stop reading their withdrawal as indifference or their pursuit and criticism as this aggressive selfishness. You can disrupt and push back on those unhelpful internal narratives. Then all of a sudden you can push the hard conversations forward. And based on what I've seen, the effective partnerships that build real resilience with better problem solving and healthier culture and teams that survive real adversity are run by those who've done this type of work, right? They've named the pattern together. They've built the habits that meet the actual need instead of just feeding the old defensive posture that they're used to. And as a reminder, these patterns are ingrained, but they are not permanent. So emotion focused couples therapy research shows consistently that they are changeable with the right sustained work. And that's exactly what co-founder coaching is designed to help create. So the co-founder effect goes a lot deeper into these specific tools from EFT and other clinical modalities that do translate directly to the founder context. So please subscribe and grab the co-founder effect below, and I'll show you exactly what to do with it.